Check,
Hi.
1, 2.
We got Jim Baker here. We got Chris Pretti over here.
Well, first of all, thank you, Chris O, and the gang that put all this stuff together. What a wonderful weekend and stuff. All those big round of applause for the One
I went to the screening and afterwards I went up to Chris and I said, "Can I please show your movie?"
Yep, Chris, you've been great to work with, and once again, thank you, Door County, for having us, and thank you, everybody in the audience, from coming from, I know not only Door County, probably from outside the county, but for those of you in Door County that were willing to come out and see a punk rock film that was put together by some past middle-aged guys, we really appreciate that.
Tell them how long this process was to put this together. I love you.
All right, so the initial thought of doing it was back in 2008. Jim had proposed the idea, and I met this guy, Brad Warner, who did a similar documentary about the Cleveland scene. And so he did this reunion show and then filmed the bands that played and did all the interviews within a couple of days and just kind of whipped it together. But we had the reunion show, but it was so much work to do the bands, then we kind of didn't film it. Well, we filmed it, but we didn't do interviews, and then we had some life stuff, and then that got shelved the project for 5 years. And then I was sitting on the couch. I had a really bad cold, and I saw this ad for Arts Camera Plus in Milwaukee, and I'm like, I'm just going to go out and buy a camera. So 2012, we did our first interview with Jim Runge when he was back for Christmas, and then we did most of the interviews in 2013, 14, and 15. But it really was lengthier than we thought, because we started with we'll just interview the top 25 people, and then you would speak to one person, they'd say, well, you got to talk to this guy or this girl, and then 90 people later, that's how that transpired.
It was a long time, yes. Many changes along the way. Chris and I had some real serious personal family stuff that happened, pretty heavy duty stuff, a murder. Couple of people that are really close to us. Chris's parents died, and I hope you're okay with me saying that, but his mom died real tragically. So just family stuff, and neither one of us have ever done a film before. So luckily, now's our time to point out we had the most wonderful editors we could have. John Pata, as well as Eric Carter, kind of finished the project and took it over the line. But we also had Max, Cole, and Dan from Milwaukee, and we had some changes along the way there. So there was some changes in the editors and stuff. I'm short, but this is still kind of too short. But we're here for questions, so we'll open it up to questions. Please throw them at us. We like questions. We're grateful to be here, and we see a couple familiar faces that came up from Green Bay and some of our friends. And for those of you guys that we don't know, thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really, just Green Bay proud. Just really awesome. Are you guys from Green Bay?
Yeah, so we both grew up in the same neighborhood, in the Astor Park neighborhood of Green Bay. If you know Green Bay, it's not the proper Astor neighborhood. That's kind of doctors, lawyers. We're next to that, which is still pretty cool, but it's very cottagey houses like a lot of the houses up here in Door County. So Chris and I grew up in that neighborhood. We didn't know each other. We lived a block and a half away, so growing up, for some weird reason, we ran in different circles until we got to high school, and Chris had gone to Catholic schools. I always say this, but I'm way more Catholic than Chris is. Even though you wouldn't know that with that potty talk, and sorry for you guys that have younger people and some older people for the potty talk in the film, but it's kind of representative of that whole scene.
So yeah, we grew up a block apart, basically. We went to East High School, and literally just decided hey, let's do some instruments, let's buy something. So I bought a bass and a crummy amp at Henry's Music. And that ABM, or production company, that was the name of our band, a bunch of morons, we had the little thing about the film, but we just kind of stuck it out. I mean, Jim's been in a lot of bands, I've been in bands. I've lived in Milwaukee since the early 90s and play music down there on occasion and that kind of stuff. So and Jim was a promoter. He did a lot of the shows at Kutska's and the VFWs and ABC Boxing. So we've just been involved with it since like 1983. And then when we really started doing this project and trying to uncover the roots, you know, going back to like Just Punks and Miners and Tyrants, like we didn't know any of those guys. We just always heard like, oh, the band's these Miners and Tyrants or Milton the Pop-Tarts. And through the course of this, then we met those guys and became friends, and they're very inspirational, and it's just really cool to, we connected the dots and brought a lot of people into that family, so.
Thank you. Any more questions from you guys? I'm really glad you brought your daughters, and I hope they started the cool band. Anybody else?
They're very punk.
Could you tell us several of those people that are in there, okay, what are their lives now like?
I love that question. And I love answering this question. So, the first one we're going to tell you about, Chris, thank you for letting me take with the oink like I always do. One of our wonderful friends, I just love him dearly, and Chris does too. I can't speak highly enough of. He was the person that introduced us to vegetarian cuisine in 1983. Straight edge music, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's a type of punk rock or genre of punk rock where you don't do drugs, you don't partake in any alcohol, no sex without love, and many other things, but it's kind of this kind of purified, Puritan punk rock thing. Ian MacKaye from Fugazi was the one that quoted this thing, but Jim started off in Green Bay in a punk rock band called No Response, one of the first hardcore bands. He was one of the first guys that was with Reverend Nord that you saw in the film a lot. He's quite a character, if you know him. If you don't, get to know him. He's in a band called Horace the Sprinkler, does a lot of other things. He's also in a band called the Smart Shoppers. But all of that leads me to say this. Jim Runge's here tonight, and because you asked that question, I think it would be really pertinent for him to come up here if he's willing to. And he's in a good spot enough to do so. I would love it if he came up, and I'll just tell you what he's been doing since then. Jim moved to Minneapolis, started doing sound production and light production at one of the big venues there, had various jobs, and then went from that to be the road manager for Lucinda Williams, the alt country artist. After that, he's been a road manager for Collective Soul, The Replacement, Wilco,
Black Keys.
and most notably the Black Keys, which was the biggest touring band in the world for a long time. So that's what Jim's done, and then once Jim introduced ourselves, if you guys still have time as it's snowing outside, I would really like to tell you and have Chris tell you what some of the other guys did, because it's awesome stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, he has Parkinson's, and he came up here all the way to Door County to be part of this, and I was glad to see him and his wife Stacy in town, and she's also in a film that Chris was at, one of the premieres they had at the Waiwega International Film Festival called Gold. If you haven't seen Gold, you want to. So, how about a big round of applause for Jim Runge, and you can ask Jim any questions you want. Anybody have any specific questions for Jim, like maybe what it was like touring with all these guys? And if you ask him, I bet he's going to tell you what Nancy Sinatra told him.
Tell us what Nancy Sinatra told him.
I can't remember.
I
Told
just,
you were smooth.
yeah, something, yeah, she told me that she respected my job and that yeah, I was smooth. I don't know, that was a long time
I think
ago.
she told him he was handsome and smooth.
No, it was nothing to do with that. It had to be, it was strictly business.
But Jim really got to spend a lot of time outside of came from the punk world, was pretty small and pretty independent. And then created that job for himself by hard work, determination, the do-it-yourself ethic, and started out in a punk rock band in Green Bay where he'll be the first one to tell you he was like a insecure kid in Green Bay and just made things happen and ended up touring in the biggest band in the world. So pretty important stuff.
And as far as like other musicians, there was a band called No. Marky Anderson, he was in there. They're from Michigan, and he plays in a bluegrass band, Monroe Crossing, and they're in the Minnesota Music Hall of Fame with Prince. So like we did some of the things like at the end of our interviews we'd say, you know, like tell us where you are and whatever, and Marky's line was something like I've played everything from backyard parties to Carnegie Hall. So I think that's cool. Our buddy Paul Wanish over here, he had the soup shop, Tarnuska's soup shop in Ephraim for years.
How many of you guys ate soup at Sarnuska's? Raise your hand. How about a big round of applause to Mr. Paul Wanish, that's in the back.
He also, his current gig is on WDOR radio. So a lot of the people that were in this film honestly like went on to like really interesting. Bill Tressler. He was in Mutual Aid. He owns Hinterland Brewery. So yeah, just a lot of people did a lot of creative things. And I think that's part of the punk scene is we attracted people that were just into arts and being creative and doing something different and thinking outside the box. And then you apply that to your life, although in different ways. So it's, you know, whether it's a restaurant or tour managing or still being in music or just, you know, being a creative human being.
Mayor of Green Bay too.
Oh, yeah, the mayor of Green Bay, Eric Gainrich, he was part of the scene and he went to a lot of the shows and he went to a lot of the shows at the Concert Cafe, which kind of happened after Kutzka's. And he got up at, when we did our film premieres in November, he got up and gave us the what is it called? Proclamation of the weekend for punk rock, and so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And there's two gentlemen that were in the band. That's called Prisoners of Society. Later they were called Never Louder Than Lovely. One of them is the timpani player for the Denver Orchestra. And the other one is second in order, so it would be the orchestra conductor, forgive me, I don't know the verbiage, Ranji, you can correct me. Conductor's assistant of the San Francisco Symphony. So there's some pretty big things that's kind of happened from a lot of the guys and girls that were involved in this. Everything from skateboard stores to music shops to Kavarna coffee shop in Green Bay.
To Yipes hair salon. Yes?
Yes. So a lot of different things. Unfortunately for you guys, I work for Door County and I work on your crisis team. So I work with homicidal and suicidal people from all walks of life. So somebody that's having ideations or if they've attempted to harm or kill themselves or somebody else, and I get involved and work with a wonderful sheriff's department you guys have up here, as well as the Surrey Police Department and all the kick-ass nurses and doctors at Door County Medical Center. So that's one of the things that I do.
This gentleman's got a question.
You said Kavarna Coffee House in Green Bay?
Yes, yes. Well, it was a previous owner and her husband, they were involved in the scene. Went to a lot of the shows. Yeah.
You had a question earlier.
Yeah, a question for Jim Runge. Big Replacements fan. So was your tour experience with them, first of all, was that pre or post Bob Stinson?
Post Bob Stinson. I did the 3 reunion shows for Riot Fest.
Okay.
Chicago, Denver, and Toronto.
Now, how was that roller coaster? You must have some.
I hope I signed an NDA. I mean, it was great. I mean, it was I moved from in the 80s, and I've lived most of my life. I moved back to Green Bay a few years ago, but before that, I lived in Minneapolis most of my life. So growing up a Replacements fan, it was like one of the highlights of my career. I'm glad I only did 3 shows, so that was enough.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna wrap this up. Is there another question? Oh, go ahead.
What do your grandkids and kids think of the punk scene?
You know, to be honest, you kind of had to be there, right? It's just like anything. So if you were in the 50s and you were there when rockabilly was happening, or maybe prior to that big band stuff, or in the 60s with whether it was the hippie movement or beatnik movement, you kind of had to be there to be part of it. And it seems weird, you got mohawks, and in today's world, that isn't really a big deal. You see people with purple hair at the grocery store, right? And that's not very shocking, but in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and northeastern Wisconsin, even in the late 70s to the early 80s, it was really weird.
It was rough.
You got beat up, you got called names, Jim will be, can back us on that, and even Paul Wanish was part of that. And
Literally having short hair and Chuck Taylors was enough to get you in a fight. I still remember I was skateboarding home from East High School. I was on the corner by the TV station on Mason and Roosevelt, and Wayne Zarnott's car pulled up, and like there's 4 or 5 guys in there, and they wanted to fight for no reason. And I had some like 20-year-old guy in a car behind them get out and said that he didn't think the odds were fair, and then that kind of diffused the situation. And that was just commonplace, really. One thing that was funny, and cars would go by you and then they'd yell Devo or Whip It. And it's like, I mean, I like Devo, but I think you got it all wrong there. So.
Or they yell the word that starts with F and ends with agate quite a bit. So to answer your question and go back to that, I know this is like a 12 o'clock answer instead of 12 to 1, right? I think it's really important that we documented this because we were there, and it's really important to us. Now, whether it resonates to other people, I think it should to somebody that wants to do it yourself, because really the whole idea behind punk rock is you don't have to have the best equipment. You don't have to be the smartest cat on the block. You just do it, and you make stuff happen. And Dave Grohl's South by Southwest keynote speak. They also had a keynote speaker. He would, if you ever get a chance to watch that on YouTube, watch it. It's Dave Grohl's keynote speech at South by Southwest. Did I say the right name? Dave Grohl. Oh, Chris is saying stuff. I thought
No, I said it was a good speech.
Oh, he's agreeing it was a good speech. I thought he was correcting who I was saying.
It was a good speech.
Oh, okay. But he talks about, like, when the first time he ever recorded something, he took a boombox, he recorded one of the instruments, then he took a second boombox, and he played the first boombox and another instrument, and then he recorded that, and then he recorded them both together, and then kind of just made something happen, and he's like, that's how he did the first Foo Fighter record, so.
Dave Grohl also slept on my floor in Green Bay and interviewed my band, which we never got in the documentary. But
Yeah. There's a lot that didn't make it in there, so there's a lot of swearing, there's a lot of weird haircuts, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of maybe not understanding what the songs are about, but it was really socially and politically driven, and there's some funny stuff too, but it was really important to us to really kind of say what we felt in the world, and that's really kind of what the film is about, and it says it at, in the scrolling at the very end. How much did we spend on the equipment for this?
Less than 1,000.
So whatever you guys want to do, make it happen and do it. And I really appreciate seeing people from all ages and backgrounds here, and we can't thank you enough. How about a round of applause for you guys for sticking out a punk rock movie on Valentine's Day?